Money, it can be said, is like power. It corrupts. The more you have, the more it corrupts. Of course, if any of us could choose, we'd rather be rich than poor. But sometimes it can be better never to have been rich than to once be rich and then be poor. Tonight's story turns a harsh spotlight onto the fading years of a once rich and powerful family. The investigation begins in the autumn of 1987, but the seeds of what happened were sown decades earlier, and then again perhaps even earlier than that. Perhaps it all dates back to the time when people of wealth and breeding reigned supreme, and if they wanted something, they just reached out and took it, no matter who stood in their way.
Now you say you're lonely, you cry the long night through. Well, you can cry me a river, cry me a river. I cried a river.
Susan, dear, please turn off that awful racket.
Now you say you're sorry.
There really is no point in your moping around. Can't you see we have your interest at heart? Simon Dale is entirely unsuitable for a young woman in your position.
Now
Susan, please stop that awful racket at once.
You cry the long
Did you hear me, Susan? I said stop that this minute. Thank you. I've told you before, Susan, I will not tolerate this sort of behavior in this house.
Poor old dear. She's convinced she was Lady Muck in some other life. I think it's sad.
Cup of tea, dear.
Simon?
Toe in the hole. Very well done.
No, it doesn't look like there's anything missing, sir. He still had 25 quid in his wallet.
Who found him?
Lady out there. She says she was helping him with the book he was writing.
Did he live alone?
Yes, he was divorced. His name was Dale. Simon Dale.
Grief affects people in different ways. So when Detective Inspector Derek Matthews set out to break the news of Simon Dale's murder to his ex-wife and family, he wasn't sure what to expect. After divorcing Simon Dale, Susan Dale had remarried. Her second husband was the Baron de Stemple. That marriage had also ended in divorce. Matthews had been told Susan de Stemple now lived at Forrester's Hall, which gave him his first surprise. The grandly titled residence was really no more than a cottage.
Detective Inspector Matthews, West Mercia Police. I wonder if I could come in.
Oh, please, come through. I'll fetch my mother.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am Baroness de Stemple. You've met my children, Marcus and Sophia.
D.I. Matthews, madam. I'm afraid there's a problem at Heath House.
What's the silly old fool done now? Burnt the place down, I shouldn't wonder.
Well, I'm afraid it's worse than that, madam. Your ex-husband is dead. I'm very sorry.
Has the house been broken into? Well, has it?
She asks, has he burnt the place down? Not how is he? No shock, no tears. Has he burnt the place down? He's found dead in the kitchen, with the doors and windows shut, and the cooker blazing away.
Well, I've seen some hard ones in my time. There was nothing. Not a flicker of emotion from any of them. Like some coffee, sir.
Please.
Detective Chief Superintendent David Cole took charge of the investigation. As he was briefed by Matthews and Detective Superintendent Ian Bullock, it became clear that this was no robbery gone wrong. It was premeditated murder.
What about the murder weapon?
He was hit a number of times with what was obviously some sort of blunt metal object. There's apparently nothing missing from the house, no sign of a forced entry. Looks to me as if Simon Dale knew the murderer and he opened the door himself.
Why would anyone want to kill a nice old boy like that?
Heath House is mine. It was paid for by me out of a trust fund, and my former husband has been squatting there for 14 years. He refused to move out of the house so that I could sell it. That is why my family and I have been forced to live here, virtually on the breadline, since our divorce.
So you wanted your husband out of the house?
Of course I did. But I had no reason to kill him, if that's what you're trying to suggest. He was about to be moved out, clearly and legally, through the courts. He'd rather see his family starve than give up the house. He could be a perfect brute, you know, sometimes violent towards me. Now, will that be all, officer?
For the time being.
Sorry, could I just ask you a question? Who's Lady Margaret Illingworth?
Oh, Puss, you mean? She used to live here, but she died last year.
Oh, sorry.
Sir, I've just found this in the back of the Persia. It's been wiped clean.
Of course it's clean. Why would I carry a dirty poker around?
West Mercia Police. I wonder if we could have a word.
Certainly. Simon had invited us both over on Friday for the afternoon. We drove up to the house, and then all of a sudden, there she was.
I'm the ex-wife. I suppose he's told you I'm mad. But I'm no madder than he is.
She gave us a terrible shock, suddenly appearing like that. Simon said she was always doing it. She hated him having guests. She said they were trespassing on her property.
Here we are.
Make the most of it. He won't be here much longer.
I'm sorry. The Baroness is always angry when I have guests. Good health.
And this was on the Friday?
That's right.
What time did you leave?
That would have been at about 8 o'clock. And the Baroness was still there when we left.
Thanks very much.
Yes, all right.
Bye.
Thanks for coming. Time of death.
Oh, we're having problems. We've tried your idea about seeing how burnt the toad in the hole was.
But what?
Well, unfortunately, after 6 hours in the oven, they all tend to look the same. And this one's been in 6 hours, this one's 16. It's impossible to tell the difference.
What about the pathologist's report?
Well, the heat in the kitchen's knackered us. He says possibly Friday night, but he can't be sure. All we've got are some groceries Simon Dale bought about 5 p.m. on Friday, which still hadn't been touched when the body was found on Sunday.
So it looks like he died on Friday night. And from Dale's visitors, we know that Susan Distemple was here till at least 8 o'clock on Friday night.
In some parts of the country, where murder is still a mercifully rare occurrence, the local police force has no permanent murder squad. Instead, a temporary team is put together made up of officers from different areas. This was how Detective Constables Andy McVicker and Robin Longmore, from West Mercia's fraud squad, found themselves investigating the murder of Simon Dale.
That's the same one. Lady Margaret Illingworth. Her brother was Susan Distemple's father.
So?
Well, Aunt Puss, as the family called her, was married to Lord Illingworth of Denton, and he was loaded. He had a country retreat and a massive place down in Grosvenor Square in London.
So?
So why was this same Lady Illingworth cremated in Hereford Crematorium at a cost to her relatives of 380 quid? And why, after nearly a year, is the bill not being paid?
Oh, yes, I remember Margaret very well. She was brought here from the hospital in a very confused state. The staff there said her family wanted nothing to do with her because she was a drunk. But it's plain to everybody that she was ill. She was suffering from senile dementia.
Did anyone visit her while she was here?
Very, very occasionally her niece came to see her. But she might just as well not be bothered for all the attention she paid the old lady. Susan, I think her name was.
How did Lady Margaret pay for things?
Oh, she didn't. She had her state pension, that was it. She didn't have any other money. That's why we thought she was dreaming when she said she was a lady.
Was Lady Illingworth a wealthy woman?
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, did she have much to live on after her husband died?
Oh, she was probably wealthier than ever before. Lord Illingworth was a millionaire. He left her a beautifully furnished house in Grosvenor Square, absolutely packed to the rafters with antiques. He left her jewellery, Rolls Royces, and 50,000 a year from a trust fund at 1940s prices.
Longmore and McVicker had been digging into Susan Distemple's family history to try and find a motive for Simon Dale's murder. They'd found one. Her desire to get him out of Heath House so she could regain her lost inheritance and her former lifestyle. But their inquiries had also led them into more familiar territory.
We think we've uncovered another crime alongside the murder, sir. There's evidence of a very serious fraud on Baroness Distemple's aunt, Lady Margaret Illingworth.
You see, sir, that document proves that when Lady Illingworth died, she left debts of over £8,000, and yet, 3 years earlier, before she moved in with the Baroness, she was a very wealthy woman.
We've also found evidence that Susan de Stemple has several bank accounts in the Channel Islands, after specifically telling us that she had 2 bank accounts, both of them in this country.
Cole was convinced. He asked for a separate fraud inquiry to be set up under Detective Inspector Mike Cowley. Longmore and McVicker's first priority was to find out all they could about the relationship between Susan de Stemple and her Aunt Puss.
Come in, please.
Friends of Lady Illingworth guided them to her former housekeeper.
I don't like to think about it too often. It upsets me. It was a terrible day. I'd worked for Lady Illingworth for 14 years, and her niece never came to visit her once. Then all of a sudden, a message came through that Susan wanted her aunt to stay with her.
Yes, all right, Kathy, I can manage, thank you.
Before we knew what was happening, Sophia arrived to take Lady Illingworth away. She said it was just for a holiday. But I never saw her ladyship again.
Did you speak to Lady Illingworth after that?
I tried ringing her. I tried lots of times. But they would never let her speak to me. And none of my letters were ever answered.
What happened to her belongings?
A couple of days later, they came back and took everything. Like a pack of vultures they were.
Yes, I remember the job very well. There was piles and piles of stuff came out of Lady Illingworth's house. But the thing I remember most about it was when I walked into that cellar. There was all this gold.
Gold?
Yeah, bars of it, stacked up in the cellar. We had to move it out, and then it was taken off to a bank, I think.
What happened to the rest of the stuff?
Well, a lot of the furniture was stored here. Then I think most of it was sold off at auction and whatnot.
Is there any way of tracing where all this stuff went?
Well, no problem. All we've got to do is look through the delivery records.
How did you receive your instructions?
Well, we dealt with Susan de Stemple. She called herself the Baroness. But when we got our cheque, there was a covering letter with it signed by Lady Illingworth.
As the officers worked their way through the documents seized from Forrester's Hall, they found receipts for more than £100,000 from the sale of furniture and works of art. They also discovered that since Lady Illingworth had been taken to live at Forrester's Hall in the middle of 1984, £20,000 worth of the old lady's stocks and shares had been sold off. A holiday flat had been bought in Spain for the Baroness's daughter, Sophia. And more than £60,000 had been withdrawn from Lady Illingworth's bank accounts, which had been changed to joint accounts in the name of her and the Baroness.
I won't keep you a moment. I think it's in here somewhere.
What the team desperately needed now was proof that the items sold at auction had once belonged to Lady Illingworth. They managed to trace her former butler.
What was Lady Margaret's state of health when she left?
Well, by that point, she started to lose her memory. There were days when she wouldn't recognise me. Or she'd get me confused with someone she'd known as a child. It was very sad. Ah, here it is. Christmas 1968. She had them specially printed.
The picture was of Lady Illingworth's living room at Grosvenor Square. It was practically an inventory of the items sold off by the Baroness. Gold, cash, furniture and jewellery. It appeared the old lady's fortune and estate had been utterly plundered. After Lady Illingworth had gone to live with her niece, more than 20 van loads of property had been removed from her London home. Most of it had been either sold or hidden away by the Baroness. But the team still had no proof that the Baroness was not entitled to her aunt's property. The acid test would be Lady Illingworth's will. It had been made in 1984, but it superseded an earlier will from 1975. There was one significant difference. In the earlier version, Susan de Stemple's name did not appear. In the 1984 will, she was named as the main beneficiary. But the new will appeared perfectly above board. Indeed, one of the witnesses had been a priest.
Well, out of the blue, I got a letter from Baron de Stemple.
From the Baron?
Yes, the Baron. He said there was some small service concerning a will he wanted my help on. And so I wrote back and said I would help.
Who was present on the day?
Well, myself and the other witness. And then Sophia, Susan's daughter, brought in Lady Illingworth. And shortly afterwards, Susan herself came in with the will. Do sit down. Thank you.
Well, how was Lady Illingworth?
Well, she spoke very slowly. She recounted the names of some of the priests attending her church in London, but it was as if she was searching for every word. Cup of tea, gentlemen?
This was disappointing. Lady Illingworth had clearly not been well at the time, but there wasn't enough in the priest's account to put the validity of the will into serious doubt.
And what happened next?
Well, Sophia came into the room and took Lady Illingworth away. And then after lunch, I added my signature to the will.
So Lady Margaret wasn't in the room when you signed the will?
No. I only saw her when Sophia brought her in earlier. I didn't see her after that.
The priest had not realized, but by signing the will without seeing Lady Illingworth herself sign it, he had made it invalid. But the fraud squad was still not quite ready to strike.
Susan de Stemple, I arrest you on suspicion of conspiracy to murder Simon Dale on or before Sunday, September the 13th, 1987.
Bother.
The murder team, on the other hand, had decided it was now or never. On December the 7th, 1987, Susan de Stemple and her two children, Sophia and Marcus, were arrested and later charged with the murder of Simon Dale, although the charges against Marcus and Sophia were subsequently dropped. With no further breakthroughs and no more forensic evidence, the police case against the Baroness was still at best only circumstantial.
On the count of murder, how do you find the defendant, Susan, Baroness de Stemple?
Not guilty.
The Baroness had triumphed. At last, the ghost of Simon Dale had been laid to rest.
It's not Lady Illingworth's hand. It's a very good attempt. But it's a forgery.
But the Baroness hadn't won the day completely.
This way, please.
As she left the court, she remained under arrest. This time it was the fraud squad who would attempt to get a conviction. The ghost of Aunt Puss wouldn't go away so easily.
I cried a river over you. Now you say you're sorry for being so untrue. Well, you can cry me a river.
The case Detective Inspector Cowley's men had built up against the Baroness was an overwhelming one, and she pleaded guilty to 5 charges of theft and 2 of forgery. On the 21st of April 1990, at the Birmingham Crown Court, she was sentenced to 7 years imprisonment. Her children, Marcus and Sophia, and her ex-husband, the Baron, pleaded not guilty to all the charges against them, but the jury found them guilty, and they were sentenced to 18 months, 30 months, and 4 years, respectively. No one can be sure how much the Baroness and her family stole from Lady Illingworth. For instance, no trace was ever found of the gold which the storage company said they removed from the cellar of her London home. In court, the figure was given at around £500,000. but detectives working on the case put it far higher, as in excess of $1 million. After the trial, a court official gave his own private verdict on the Baroness de Stempel. He said, "She is not sad and she's not mad. She's that rare being. She's just plain bad." Good evening.